President William Ruto left the country on Thursday night and has been in Italy for the G7 summit and is now in Switzerland attending talks on peace in Ukraine. On these trips, he's had the ear of global world leaders, but it does not come cheap. According to the most recent control of budget report for the first 9 months of this financial year, which is from July 2023 to March this year, 2024, travelling expenditure amounted to 18.18 billion shillings compared to 14 billion shillings in a similar period in the last financial year. I believe we should have that on your screen. And out of that 18.18 billion shillings, there we go. That is 18.18 billion shillings, and that is for the first 9 months of 2023-2024 financial year, compared to 14 billion shillings in the same period last financial year. Now, domestic travel accounted for 12.33 billion shillings, and out of that, the 18.18, 5.85 billion shillings foreign travel accounted for that figure, as you can see on your screen. Now, this could explain why in the budget speech presented Thursday, Treasury Cabinet Secretary Njuguna said all government training would be conducted in government institutions and there would be a cutback on foreign trips. But why is the number of trips the president makes such a sore subject? I delve into that with my panelists tonight, but first, let's set the stage. Nicknamed Tanga Tanga by his predecessor, former President Uhuru Kenyatta, President William Ruto appears to have taken his sojourns global. His frequent trips outside the country drawing the attention of Kenyans, with social media users generating memes that seem to depict the president as a tourist. While they may trigger a snicker, the cost implications on the taxpayer are a serious matter that have demanded a response from President William Ruto on more than one occasion. Only 2 days ago, Treasury Cabinet Secretary Njuguna made a commitment to cut back on the cost of foreign trips in his budget speech. That very evening, President William Ruto was on a flight to Italy for a G7 summit, and as I read this, in Switzerland for a summit on peace in Ukraine. 10 days ago, he was in South Korea, but it was the state visit he took to the U.S. 9 days before that that truly reignited debate on the cost of his foreign trips to the taxpayer. More specifically, it was the sleek luxury jet he used. He later explained he got it at a bargain of 10 million shillings from friends in the United Arab Emirates.
Look at me, Kenyans. Look at me again. I must lead from the front as I tell others to tighten up their belt. Mine must be where to begin.
The government spokesman's response was not as refined. Mora's choice of language aside, the defense provided by the Kenya Kwanza administration has been that there is a return on investment by way of foreign goodies attracted and jobs secured for Kenya's unemployed youth. President Ruto has also taken center stage on the issue of green financing, challenging disparities in access to finance for those in the developing world. On the continent, Kenya now seeks to chair the African Union to further this agenda. His pledge to send 1,000 police officers to Haiti has also significantly grown his political capital. For a man for whom the shadow of the International Criminal Court indictment loomed large, to a darling of the West, some have argued puppet. Given his rising star on the international stage, is President Ruto an embodiment of the scripture Mark 6:4 that reads, "A prophet is treated with honor everywhere except his own hometown"? I did tell you that would be delving into that with my panelists. They are in studio. We have Professor Peter Kagwanja, and he is the CEO, Africa Policy Institute. Good to have you here tonight. We also have Professor Macharia Munene. Today, this is just a very educated panel. Professor Macharia Munene, who is a historian as well as an international relations lecturer, USIU. So those are his areas of expertise. We also have the chair of the Diplomacy and International Studies Department, University of Nairobi. That is Dr. Patrick Maluki.
Pleasure.
Good to have the three of you here. I ended that story with that scripture, Mark 6:4. A prophet is celebrated everywhere except in his hometown. Why do you think the number of foreign trips President William Ruto takes is such a sore subject, Professor Kagwanja?
I think there is a true understanding of what the office of the president should be or is vis-a-vis our international relations. One of the things that must be underlined is that the president is the principal officer in regard to foreign affairs. Everybody else is supposed to be the advisor, and the protocol is simply that. So the minister and the ambassadors and everybody else, that is there. So when a president appears in a country, that country registers that Kenya values it. The moment you just keep on sending roll-level officers, then they interpret differently. So it's a very delicate balancing act where you have to keep the trip low and at the same time maximize on your visit outside there so that you put the firm hand of the country in the friendly country that you're visiting. What we have seen is that in the last 20 months, we have 62 trips, 38 countries. And of course, that's what is making Kenyans ask a lot of questions. So I think the issue is, if you go by the first record, Kenyatta, I think, made 2 or 3 trips for his own entire 15 years. The person who made the trips was his Vice President, Daniel Moi. He visited virtually every country in the world as a deputy president or vice president at that time. During Kibaki's time, Moi himself, Moi made all the trips to every part of the world as president, and his deputy made very few trips. Now with Kibaki balanced between his trips and those that were made by his vice president, particularly Kalonzo Musyoka. That's why Kalonzo Musyoka's portfolio is very, very strong on foreign affairs. And finally, when we come to Uhuru Kenyatta was a quintessential traveler. He traveled to all the major meetings for the G8 or G7 2 times and so on. So the challenge therefore facing Ruto is that I don't think Kenyans are more worried about the trips he makes. I think the question is, what do they bring Kenyans?
Okay.
What gains do they bring to Kenya?
All right.
And particularly at this time when we're talking about shoestring budgets.
We'll leave that for the next part of the conversation. So what does it bring Kenya?
Yes.
But Professor Macharia Munene, he was labeled Tanga by his predecessor. Is this just him continuing in the same vein? Maybe he just likes to get out and interact with people. Is it his management style?
Well, there may be some element of truth in that. He does like it. There's that time, I think, as Peter was saying, the president is the #1 in almost everything. In diplomacy, or in economics, or even in social affairs, the running of the affairs, everything in the country looks at the president. There's also that one time when he said something very peculiar. Mm-hmm. That his ministers and advisors and people, PSs, are incompetent. Mm-hmm. You remember that? Mm. Yeah. So if they are incompetent everywhere, then he has to do everything. Traveling is one of those things, because the Minister of Foreign Affairs may not be as good as he should be. There is that implication that he has to do. He said he is the diplomat #1, and so no, he cannot trust anybody else to do the thing he wants to do. There is also another aspect. Ruto is out to outdo Uhuru in everything. Everything. And since Uhuru did enjoy traveling, not as much as this, so he has to travel more to beat Uhuru. So there's some sort of a competition.
That's an interesting way to look at it. I don't know whether you agree, Dr. Patrick Maluki, with those thoughts, but could it be that he's a man on a mission, that he has set for himself targets, issues to do with the global financial architecture, issues to do with green financing, and so this is just him outdoing himself?
I think the president is the chief diplomat of a country. And what we are seeing is that President Ruto is raising the profile of Kenya's diplomacy. In diplomacy, basically, we look for voice and visibility. And for a long time, many people, if you ask them where is Kenya, they wouldn't have even heard, even located in the world map. So for me, it's not about how many trips the president makes, it's the substance of those trips. I don't mind if the president actually delivers in the trips. So it's not the number, it is the engagement. It is the fact that he's getting invited. That is a testament that Kenya is more being noticed, and therefore it is a plus in the Kenya diplomacy.
One of the things I raised in that story so he appears to be a darling of the West now, right? Mm-hmm. All these invitations, all these doors opening from a man who was, him and Uhuru were told the Kenyan electorate were told, if you vote these people in, choices have consequences.
Yes.
To now, all these doors are open to him. Mm-hmm. So there are those who say, oh, he's a puppet of the West. But we'll come back to that. We are joined from New York by Professor David Monda. Good to have you join us. It should be afternoon where you are now. Do you think this situation would be tempered, or the furore that often accompanies discussions around the president's foreign trips would be contained if there was greater transparency in terms of the number? The delegation that accompanies him the other day, he was telling us the luxury jet he took to the U.S. only cost us 10 million shillings, but he stopped there. He didn't, there are questions around, was it a gift? What did we have to give in return? Do you think greater transparency is the answer?
I think greater transparency is one of the challenges from our Department of State in terms of articulating the president's foreign policy. But I also think in terms of imaging, I think that's something that, Foreign Affairs really needs to get right. And I'll give you a very specific example. So with the issue of the private jet, for the hustler who's on the street of Nairobi, 10 million shillings is not a small amount of money, right? So there seems to be a mismatch when the government's saying we're going to have austerity measures, but the government officials are living high on the hog. But more importantly, when the president's flying around in private jets, and then goes to COP28, COP29, Earth summits, and talks about climate change, there's a huge contradiction, and it's a very embarrassing image, because we know private jets are one of the largest contributors to the depletion of the ozone layer and climate change. So I think messaging is a huge problem. And I wouldn't be as quick to dismiss the cost of these trips, even given that there'll be bigger value in terms of bilateral agreements. The president really needs to, as diplomat-in-chief, explain to the Kenyan people why these trips are being made and why these huge delegations are being justified. I don't think that's being done properly.
All right. On that note, I'll just put a pin in the discussion and we can take a look at what he achieved, because you were saying as long as there's something that is coming out of it, what he tells us, or we've been told he achieved in Italy. G7 leaders have endorsed President William Ruto's call for global financial reform, and that is at the recent summit in Italy. Ruto emphasized the need for changes to ensure equitable access to finance for the global south, particularly Africa, and to the continent's involvement in the decision-making processes.
The G7 summit saw commitments to update the global financial systems to meet contemporary challenges effectively. This includes backing initiatives like the G20 Compact with Africa.
Thank you. Thank you.
And the Paris Pact for People and Planet, aimed at increasing development financing, climate solutions and private sector investments. Acknowledging the importance of sustainable and transparent financing, The G7 highlighted initiatives such as the Nairobi-Washington Initiative, which focuses on mobilizing domestic resources and encouraging private sector involvement in development efforts. The G7 pledged increased support for Africa's sustainable development goals, aligning their efforts with the Africa Union's Agenda 2063. They endorsed greater African representation in global forums and supported reforms within institutions such as the International Monetary Fund and World Bank to ensure equitable participation. The group also supports the operationalization of the African Continental Free Trade Area, which members believe will be crucial for Africa. In line with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the G7 reiterated their commitment to accelerating global progress, emphasizing environmental, social, and governance standards.